Welcome, everybody. My name is Edward Roski. I am CEO here at NRL and host, sponsor, and part-time MC over the course of the day. I am not our DJ. That awesome role is being handled by Ali Williams, and she has put together a very impressive playlist. So make sure you keep the volume on between each session. I wanted to start today by introducing our keynote speaker. And we've done a couple of these industry EPM summits up to now, and I've tended to do the keynote, but I wanted to step aside today for somebody who knows far more about retail than I ever possibly could. I first met our keynote speaker in, let's just politely say, the 1990s. He was elbows deep in gold and diamonds at Zale Corporation, but he's actually been focused on the retail industry for over 40 years now. After working for multiple years in large retailers, he decided to take his knowledge of those multinationals to more companies by helping out over the next 20 years in retail consulting. He headed multiple business units focusing on retail. He's done everything from working in retail to owning store locations to operating his own locations across a ton of different retail segments. And most recently, he brought his retail experience to Oracle, where he's now the executive director for all of retail and consumer packaged goods. When I wanted to have somebody to kick off today, he was my dream get to come and do our keynote, and thankfully he said yes. This guy truly puts the man in performance management, your friend and mine, Dean Tarpley.
Thank you, Edward. What Edward doesn't tell you is that when I started working with him, and it was 1997, I believe, my first interaction was I asked him how to do expense report. Oh no, he came to me and said, can you copy all these expenses for me and send them into the home office? So I was literally doing his expense reports for him when I first started. So thank you, Ed. And Ali, that's great music, but when you get School of Rock next, I'm assuming you're gonna put on some Metallica and Zeppelin, so I can't wait to hear that. So
absolutely, Dean, you got it.
All right. So with that said, yeah. So I've been doing this a long time, and just a real quick to kick this off, and I appreciate NRL and Edward and team to give me this opportunity to, go through the state of retail, because there's a lot going on out there. And so what I want to start with quickly is just my introduction. I'm going to talk about the trends in retail and how technology and innovation is transforming the industry. What we're doing here at Oracle in retail, and it's not a sales pitch, it's just really, you could almost go into any of the big, software vendors or technology companies and probably a similar message, but we're heavily focused in this industry. I'm going to end with just making it a little bit personal, because I still do own and operate some multi-location brands, and it'll be a nice segue into the next speaker. Rob Price is the CEO of School of Rock. So, and then I believe we're going to open it up for some questions if there will be any. My background is somewhat multifaceted. I actually did things in reverse. I started my own company when I was 19. I got in the video store business and did that for 6 or 7 years until this blue and gold wave rolled over the top of all those mom and pops. And I realized that when Blockbuster started dominating that industry, I had to go back, get a real job, which meant I had to go back and finish my degree. I got it in finance. And then I ended up working for Blockbuster in their corporate finance group. I was living in the Excel hell that we all, a lot of companies still deal with to this very day. At the time, I think it was actually Lotus 123 hell, but that doesn't rhyme. So the reality is I've seen a lot over those years, and then I left Blockbuster out of their corporate finance group, and I went over to Zale Corporation. And
hey Doug, I think the meeting has started. Do you want to attend that? We can update this.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Update this calendar. Yeah.
Can somebody mute? I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay. Can everybody hear me? Okay. Robin.
Yeah, we can
sounds
hear
good.
you great as you can.
Okay, thank you. So I went over to Zale Corporation, started working their store operations planning group, and guess what? I was living in the same Lotus 123, which ultimately became Excel hell, and then I then moved from there to head up merchandise planning. And so in 1997, I went into consulting, and I've worked with over 200 retail companies in that 20 years. So I've seen a lot, experienced a lot. And hopefully some of that insight will be valuable to you today. Let's start, really just take a step back and go through some of those trends in retail. And when I say trends in retail, it's really those things that have been mostly in my lifetime and in my career over the last 40 years. But I'm going to start with a pop quiz, and nobody needs to answer this or, put any polls in, but just, if you know it, just mentally make a note. But I want to know if you know who made the following quote and regarding what company. And the quote is, "We are not too big to fail. In fact, I predict one day we will fail. We will go bankrupt. If you look at large companies, their lifespans tend to be 30 plus years, not 100 plus years." If you guessed Jeff Bezos is Amazon, you'd be correct. And that was literally probably within the last month or so that he said that. Now, a lot of people will say, does he really believe that? Does he really think that? Or is he just trying to energize his organization, make sure they're always on edge? I personally think, I went to psychology and I took psychology in college, and there's something called self-handicapping strategy, which means you set the bar sort of low, and if you leap over it, you look great. But I think there's somewhere in there, I'm not sure that I believe that he really believes that. But then I also have some experience with a lot of folks that came out of Amazon, and he does create a culture that is always looking at the possibility of failure. And some of that failure is expected, but his belief is if you're going to fail, you got to fail fast and you got to move on to the next. But I think it does speak to sometimes the the retailers that get so large. When you think of the Sears, when you think of the J.C. Penney's, when you think of Kmart's, that at the time, 30, 40 years ago, nobody would have thought they would have gone bankrupt. Each of those companies are over 100 years old, and some of them not only gone bankrupt, but they've vanished. And then you even look at companies like Blockbuster that literally dominated an entire industry, 9,000 locations globally, because they missed a critical pivot to digital. When they could have made that pivot, they literally went cradle to grave in a 25-year time frame. Not just the company, but an entire industry. So this year is specifically challenging for retailers because, for obvious reasons. I mean, it was already challenging with all the pressures of competitive pressures and the new business models that were requiring everyone to change at a moment's notice. But those that couldn't make that change, the pandemic was just the death knell, so to speak. So already this year, or up to, I believe it's September, up to this month, there's been 27 retailers that have filed for bankruptcy. And I know a couple of these, unlike what Jeff Bezos said, are over 100 years old. So what causes this? So obviously the last few months within retail have just had a completely, massive impact on the industry. I'm not going to go through each of these bullets here, but at the end of the day, companies are having to rethink their business models. They're having to be nimble. They're having to pivot on a moment's notice. And those that don't simply can't make it. But it's also creating new ways to manage and operate and measure the business. So something I found yesterday, which I thought was kind of funny, is even new metrics or new ways to measure. So instead of EBITDA, we have earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization, and coronavirus. So maybe companies can adopt this into their key performance indicators and key metrics. But at the end of the day, we look back at I call this the sort of the simplified retail history. And again, this is just in the 40 years that I've been in the business and what I've witnessed. If you look back in the 70s, 80s, and even the 90s, I call it the crowd-driven, operationally focused. Stack it high and watch it fly was a retail sort of concept that if you put these stores in malls, for instance, or you put them in big boxes, you put them where there's a lot of foot traffic, you can just stuff these stores with product, and just the sheer volume of people going through, you can sell that product. But if it doesn't sell, you mark it down. And obviously that's something that retailers hate doing, but at the end of the day, they do it. And if they don't do it well and it doesn't sell, they end up closing the entire store, or sometimes the whole business goes out, the whole company goes out of business. And then I saw the shift. So I actually was very fortunate when I was at Zale to watch this shift, because they came out of bankruptcy in the late 80s and early 90s. And then we had a situation where, you know, there was a very huge focus on operationally driven organization, where Zale was, you know, not really heavily focused on quality merchandise. And then Bob DiNicola came from Macy's and brought a team of executives. And I saw the transformation of what happens when a retailer goes through a modern, you know, a transformation, modern at that time, which was go from an operationally driven company that really wasn't focused on quality merchandise to really focus then on making it a merchandise driven organization, visually appealing merchandise, focused on assortment that met the customer at the right time in the right location, and a heavy focus on that visual merchandising. And today where we are is the customer driven, digitally enabled. So a place where you have to know your customer across their entire journey, and you have to meet them at their moment of need. It's not a want to do, it's a have to do. It's a necessity to operate and thrive in this marketplace today. So when I was talking about transformation, it's sometimes an overused buzzword. You know, we can have transformation across the entire enterprise. We see it happening in lots of different organizations, you know, or in companies and retailers. So, you know, if you look at, and this is public knowledge, but if you look at what's happening, for instance, I'll just use Petco as an example. You know, why would I, as a consumer, you know, go into a store to buy dog food when I can go on Amazon, set it and forget it, and have that dog food delivered on the first of every month, and I never have to worry? There has to be a compelling reason for me to go into that store if they're going to keep investing in those real estate assets. So they're transforming themselves. They're bringing in pet grooming, doggy, you know, pet hotels, vaccination and veterinary clinics, giving me a reason to go into that store, but then also engaging with that brand, and then hopefully grabbing me as a customer and creating that loyalty. So when I do order that dog food and set it and forget it, I'm buying it with them and not their competitor or Amazon. And so that transformation is, it's different than change. You know, change is driven by tactics, it's finite, it fixes the past. Transformation is really all about creating the future. It's reinventing, and it's the result of many, many changes, and it's driven by a major strategy and a fundamental knowledge that we can't be the same company tomorrow that we are today. And so it prescribes vision, it doesn't subscribe to it. So when we talk about retail trends and what we see out there, you know, at the very, very highest level, and we saw this with the bankruptcies, remarkable retailers will flourish, and they are flourishing. In the pandemic, there are retailers, and some of it's segment driven, that are absolutely doing extremely well. Grocers today are doing very well during the pandemic. And then anything that is focused on in-home experiences. I read recently that it may have saved the guitar industry. You know, Gibson and Fender, you know, were on the brink of bankruptcy, but people now being stuck at home are wanting to learn how to play the guitar, you know, or you know, things that they may not have done before, you know, working out inside your home, etc. It's had a huge boom on certain segments of the industry. But those remarkable retailers are going to flourish even once the pandemic passes, and the unremarkable retailers are going to vanish. And some of those unremarkable retailers are the ones that were some of those logos that we saw earlier. And what is an unremarkable retailer? It's a retailer where they speak negatively about your brand, or in some cases they don't talk about you at all. And so if you look at the major, you know, the three key trends that are happening out there, it's really focused on changing customer expectations. In the old world, you know, we really only could think and wrap our minds in technology around and data around three dimensions. It was product, location, and time. But now we truly introduced the third dimension, which is the customer, and it's allowed these retailers to pivot to customer, because what's happening is we call this righteous battle for customer attention. They want to grab real estate in the minds of the retailers. You have to be able to do that. I always say, the one brand that has a lot of real estate in my mind is Apple. But there's also some local places that I go on a routine basis that have a lot of, Quick Trip has a lot of real estate in my mind. I spend a lot of money and a lot of time in there. The scarcity is a thing of the past. Consumers have so many options. The only thing that they still have, still a scarcity of, is their time. But so from a retail perspective, it requires that we have it anytime, anywhere, any way that the consumer wants it. Because if you can't provide it that way, your competitor will. Those experiences have to be integrated, and they have to be frictionless to win and win most often. And then now with the coronavirus and pandemic, safety and security literally take on a whole new meaning. When you walk into a store, it isn't just making sure your credit card information isn't going to be stolen. Now you literally want to make sure that, I am safe when I walk in. The employees are keeping me safe. The customers are keeping me safe. I don't want to walk out with a disease. There's a heavy focus on cost, efficiency, and talent. Retail companies struggle to this day with outdated systems. It's amazing when I walk into organizations and I see what's happening, because my role at Oracle is I speak the language of customers. So as Oracle, just like the retail industry is pivoting to customer, Oracle's been pivoting to their customers. And as there's been this transition from the on-premise world of technology into the cloud, and where our offerings are service-based, we have to recognize here at Oracle that we have to give white glove treatment to our customers. And there was a recognition 3 years ago that to do that and do that effectively, you have to know your customer, know their pain point, and understand the needs of that customer. And it starts with being able to speak their language. So that's when I came to Oracle 3 years ago, is to fill a role within business value services to do that. And that's what I do to this day. And so as I work with those retail companies, I'm out on the forefront understanding the pain point, and it still is remarkable struggles they still have today with those outdated systems and unreliable siloed data. There's also, just like there's a righteous battle for customer, there's a righteous battle for talent going on within the retail industry. When I was using the Petco example, no longer can I just pay, close to minimum wage to have somebody, stand at a register and ring up a transaction. If I'm going to have Dean bring in his dog Baloo, and Baloo has a history of vaccinations and a specific type of food that's right for his breed, etc. I need to know and understand that. And then I want to be able to upsell, cross-sell, engage with Dean and Baloo. And to do that and do that effectively, you have to elevate the talent, but not just elevating the talent, but give them the right tools and capabilities for interacting with that customer. And so, as companies, and it's not just the front office like that, but it's also the back office. If I'm working on 40-year-old legacy AS400 programs, it's very, very challenging for me to go out in a marketplace and hire great talent who are coming out and want to be working with cutting edge technologies, whether that's in the budgeting and planning space, my finance organization, my accounting organization, or again, out in the field and on the front lines. So those inadequate applications that they have today are just not optimized for talent acquisition and retention. And so what we're seeing a lot is that automation of front and back office. So when we talk about automation, a lot of times you'll hear the buzzwords of machine learning and artificial intelligence, but I always recognize that we never want to take away the human side of what makes a retailer very, very unique. The last thing is these evolving market dynamics. It truly is a world that we're entering now where there's a convergence of the digital and physical worlds. If we look back 15, 20, 30 years, a lot of companies, as they were standing up their own e-commerce business, sometimes they would have it as a separate business or a separate location. It wasn't a real, defined knowledge at the time of how those worlds needed to collide and mesh together, so that from a customer perspective, you really don't even think of in a store, whether I'm buying online, I just want to interact with the brand. And the brand is where my relationship is, because again, they'll give it to me anytime, anywhere, any way I want it. So these retailers are pivoting to a true omni-channel capability that supports the customer along their entire journey, and it has to be digitally enabled. And so new business models are constantly evolving. And you'll hear some of this throughout the day, I'm sure, but I know in fact on the next presentation, but the pandemic sometimes, for a lot of companies, enforced companies to be innovative and create new business models. But those business models can be sustainable across time and create, out of tragedy sometimes comes great innovation that becomes sustainable. And if you look at, I was just watching the other day where Whataburger is now going to another level of delivering food to homes, and I never thought I'd see the day that, hamburgers and French fries would make it to someone's house, but evidently that's where we're going. So those business models are just constantly evolving, and even post-pandemic they'll continue evolving. And that's probably why Jeff Bezos makes those comments, because he knows the bigger his company is, the harder it is to turn and navigate when that next innovation comes along. So, the last couple of things I'll say is, we don't go to Home Depot to buy a drill. We go to Home Depot because we have we have the need to put a hole in a wall or into something. And so this whole idea of human-centered design, where retailers are focused on empathy to me and what I'm trying to accomplish as a consumer, is critical. And to do all this and do it extremely effectively requires orchestration and harmony across the entire retail organization. And that'll be really a key theme as I go through the rest of this presentation. So when we were talking earlier about some of the things that I see the challenges out there, because as much time as I spend out in front of retail customers, if you look at it across two axes, you have change that's happening in retail, and it's just going at an ever escalated pace. And along that change, there's competition, there's customer expectations, there's innovation that's happening in across the entire industry. There's security requirements, compliance, sustainability is important across the entire industry. And then again, we talked about talent. But the problem is, and what I was just kind of speaking to with Amazon and where companies get stuck, is they have so many constraints. Their IT infrastructure, their data, their processes, the people, the culture, the operating model doesn't allow them to pivot quickly. So they have this really challenging time with this ability to respond. And I call it the capability gap. So if you have a massive capability gap in your organization, it doesn't matter how great your planning, budgeting, forecasting is, the ability to execute can just simply not be there. So the goal for companies is to close that capability gap. And this is where we start introducing the concept of why is it that cloud is becoming so pervasive around enterprise applications. We don't really think about cloud when we think about our mobile applications and Facebook. I mean, as a consumer, if I wasn't working at a technology company, I really wouldn't even understand why it's so easy for me to just get an update and hit a button and download it to my phone and be future ready. I'm always updated. I'm always ready. I've got the latest, greatest. I never have to close up shop and spend a lot of time, money, and resources to update my iPhone. But as organizations, if you look back at the history of the on-premise applications, whether they were Hyperion Planning, or whether it's EBS or PeopleSoft, or you name it, there was really, on average, it was like 5-year cycles to adopt new innovations that were being pushed out. And with the cloud today, it's more like the iPhone. Those enhancements, those capabilities are being pushed out quarterly. And And so what that creates is the ability to innovate, the ability to have applications that are always future ready and be able, what we call outpace change. And so what does that allow to happen? And how does that, once you've made this change and once organizations are going through these transformations, because here at Oracle, we see it all the time. We see large companies. Some of you are on the phone today. Some of you are presenting today. I won't, divulge names of companies, but we're doing large transformational deals, moving customers to the cloud on an enterprise-wide basis. And a lot of that is really focused on these key areas. They want to be able to better engage their customers. They want a complete view of those customers. They want integrated systems. They want to avoid that channel-centric thinking and deliver end-to-end experiences, whether it's from the store to the web to delivery. They want to be the remarkable retailing. So I defined what the unremarkable retailer is. So what's the remarkable retailer? The remarkable retailer is when all the elements of the brand come together, and they come together in a unified, meaningful way. And companies today, as I said earlier, they have empathy for their customers, and their values have to be infused, and the customers' values are infused in their shopping patterns. And so companies have to react and be able to meet that need across that customer journey. And then the ability to predict and respond. And so the prediction and reaction and operational needs throughout the entire organization is better facilitated with integrated systems. And then bringing in that level of intelligence. We talked about the ability to recruit, hire, train, grow, and retain talent. Ultimately, I think of it this way, because I spent 20 years in consulting, and a lot of that was in advisory consulting and process reengineering and true sort of get under the hood, redefine processes from a retail perspective. And one of the reasons I came to Oracle is because I saw the shift happening where literally the best practices, if you will, the modern best practices of what your peers are doing, what all the leading companies are doing, we're embedding that capability into our technologies, into our applications. And so where in the old days where the consultants would come in and spend 6-9 months just defining the solution, now where we are is a world where we're moving to where the best practices are there. It's a service, you're buying the service, and the consulting is more about configuring and standing it up. And then you're the consumer of great solutions that are going to evolve with you over time. And there's no more having to do all that data integration and all that customization. So with all the data in one place, you're able to make better decisions in real time, focused on the ability to have that agility during some very, very dynamic changes in the market. And then, regardless of who your technology company is, they need to be making massive investments in research and development, because again, to be competitive in this space, you always want to make sure that that solution is growing with you, and again, being future ready. And as I said earlier, Bezos would say, failure is not an option, and he said fail, but fail fast. But the overall theme in his mind is, if failure is not an option, then neither is success. So to do that and do that effectively, a lot of it is really based on bringing in those emerging technologies, the things that take out the human gut, if you will. Sometimes the human gut's important and necessary, but a lot of times we have humans doing things that are not nearly as high quality and not nearly as efficient and fast, and certainly not automated. And so we're focused here at Oracle on embedding a lot of these capabilities into our enterprise applications. And I know a lot of the companies out there today are focused on the same things, but at the end of the day, it is an evolution within this industry and what's happening as technology companies are trying to meet the needs of their retail customers. So again, this isn't an Oracle commercial. This is just simply saying, from our perspective, a view from the bridge of what we're doing in retail and how we're helping retail customers. this is what we're doing and what we're seeing. So, this is really meant to just show the complexity, if you will, of managing and empowering an entire retail organization, what it takes, the back office, the front office. Obviously it's not all inclusive, but if you look at it from a very, retail centric standpoint, everything, and what's not on here is a lot of the underlying foundational things, like just the hardware, the data centers, everything that Oracle does. It truly is breadth and depth. It's soup to nuts. It's top to bottom and left to right. But some of these, as you see in the light green, are very, very retail centric applications that are only focused really primarily in this industry, and then a lot of our core applications that are really almost agnostic to the industry that you're in, but merging that all together and bringing that capability, and then having the thread of common data, common applications, common look and feel, all driven in the cloud, allows a company to really execute. So when we talked earlier about orchestrated and harmonized retailing, what Oracle's direction is and how we're trying to go to market and work with our customers. Now, obviously, very few are going to go Oracle end to end, but at the end of the day, what we want to be out in the forefront of the market is talking about how we can take a retailer through a transformational process end to end, align with their strategy, and then empower their entire organization in the cloud, and then with those common data model, common best practices, et cetera, and then linking and integrating all of those processes across the entire company. Because while that slide may look busy, what it really is all about is, if you think about the retail value map, and this is just a sample. I could have a grocer, I could have an apparel store, a specialty retailer, a department store, you name it. But at the end of the day, we all have a perspective of what the value map looks like for our organization, and what we're trying to accomplish. And then that value map is heavy focus on the customer journeys and how that retail organization, again, is going to meet that customer at their moment of need. To do that and do it effectively, it has to happen at the front office, obviously, but also has to happen at the back office. All the things we're going to be talking about today with budgeting and planning and EPM and all the back office solutions, whether it's ERP and HCM, human capital management, you name it. It's all there and should be there for the purpose of supporting and increasing the value those solutions are bringing to the retail across the entire enterprise, and then ultimately in supporting that customer journey. And so if you take that prior slide, at the end of the day, that's just the harmony that goes, and what's happening is the overlay of how Oracle, in our case, we're trying to bring that across the entire enterprise, really focused on that retail value map and making sure that we have solutions across the entire value map, and being able to use a specific piece of that, or certainly the capabilities to go end to end if needed. So lastly, it's regardless of the technology vendor and partner that you have, we want companies to see that there is value in the common platform, the common data model, the common direction specific to the industry is critical. Embed those best practices, leverage the data across the enterprise. That becomes the fabric, the thread that brings it all together, and bringing in the ability to connect, extend across all those suite of applications, leveraging that intelligence regardless of the human interface that people want to use, whether it's mobile or desktop or voice and chat bots, et cetera, how they want to interact with that, and then always looking forward to that next innovation and embedding that throughout the entire suite of applications. So before I stop for questions, I just want to end by saying, I talked earlier about that I owned and operated businesses, and certainly took a swing back in the 80s with video stores that didn't turn out too well. Although I will say that I had the last laugh in that when I was at Alvarez and Marsal, I did work on the bankruptcy of Blockbuster. So I was there in that industry from beginning, middle to end. But about 12 years ago, a good friend of mine, Terry Longway, who I think is on this call because he works at NRL, we founded our first franchise of School of Rock, and we ended up with 27 locations, but also got into other brands. The Coder School, which teaches kids how to code, and then art schools focus on really high quality, art for students that have a passion for that. And so it puts me in a unique position because it's been 12 years now, but as a multi-unit franchisee, I get to experience what my customers experience. Even though it's a small business, I'm always living and breathing what my customers experience. I got to make payroll. I've got to raise capital. I've got to make sure the rent gets paid. I deal with the same challenges. It's just on a different scale. But I got into these businesses and certainly, School of Rock, and I'm not going to steal Rob's thunder, but, it's what I call the ultimate in the experience economy, as he'll talk about, when he begins his presentation, getting kids and putting them on stages and putting on live shows, that's an experience. But, focusing that childhood enrichment but the business model was truly on all of these is truly built on social gathering of kids, primarily. We do have, adult programs, but at the end of the day, that was our focus. And then all of a sudden there's this, oh no moment. What do you mean we can't open our business? We have to close our doors. We were not an essential service, an essential business. So we have to jump through and do all kinds of scenario modeling. When you have a lot of locations that are extremely intensive, capital intensive, not just, or expense intensive, because you have payroll, you have rent and et cetera, et cetera. And when you have, well over 100, 200 employees, it can be very, very scary. And so, as a small business, you have capital constraints and that a lot of the large companies that have access to capital markets, we don't have as a small business. So we had an extreme need because as a franchisee, we really look to the franchisor. And in some cases, a lot of small businesses also look to the government. And you've heard a lot about PPP funding. So between those, we've managed through the pandemic. We're still challenged, but I actually asked Rob Price to speak today because I think it's a great story around how a company and a franchisor who, we're all stakeholders in the decisions that they make. And they made some really, really key decisions that helped us sustain and manage through this crisis. And so I think it's going to be a great presentation. I encourage you to all to watch that and listen to Rob. But I just wanted to end with that, and I'm happy to take any questions.
So while we're waiting for questions to come in, I have to share with you, Dean, my little Blockbuster story. We were actually building their dashboards on top of S-Base in the fall of, I want to say 2000, and we were at the big, massive, glass and steel building in downtown Dallas. And my desk, because I was actually building it myself, believe it or not, I used to actually work. I was on the same floor as Gary Golden, the controller, and Barry, can't remember his name, the CFO. And that was, I was there the day that Netflix came to visit Blockbuster. If anybody doesn't know the story, Reed Hastings, and I can't remember the other person over at Netflix, came out to Blockbuster headquarters because they were bleeding money. They were essentially a DVD distribution company at the time. And they offered to sell for $50 million. And I was there, and I knew it was an important meeting because Antioco, showed up with his nicest, shoes on and went into this meeting. And they came out, and Gary Golden, the controller, came out and immediately walked into my office. He burst out laughing. And I said, "What's so funny?" And he said, "You wouldn't believe what these guys want us me to pay $50 million for. They think our customers want to wait 2 days to get a movie when 98% of America is within 5 miles of a Blockbuster store." And I thought that was pretty funny too. So I said, do you think it'll always be 2 days? And he's like, yeah, they have this plan for like opening distribution centers and trying to reduce it down, but they're out of money. Like, I'm not going to buy them. We'll just do our own thing. And yeah, that's one of those stitch in 9 saves time type stories. So, and then you got to come close them out in bankruptcy. So
Yeah, well,
we were both there.
You bring up, since we have some time, I'll give you 2 quick stories. So when I worked for Blockbuster in 1992, I worked in the office of the CFO. And one of my jobs was to write a newsletter every month on the state of the business. And it was just a newsletter that I would send out, and it had to be approved by the CFO at the time. And it was just, it's kind of the usual, almost like a SWOT analysis. But I actually put on there, the threats were any time that somebody could sit on their couch and be able, we weren't worried about pay on demand, because at the time you couldn't pause a movie, and I didn't think it would ever be a real risk, because I believed that people, really wanted to be able to pause a show, and be able to, do everything you do. And so I put that as one of the risks, and, but just remembering back to some of that. But the other thing was, when I worked on the bankruptcy of Blockbuster, when I was at Alvarez and Marsal, Jim Keyes was the CEO, and I was working directly with Jim, trying to figure out a strategy if there was anything to salvage and come out of bankruptcy with. And, he was hanging his hat on the blue box. They called it the blue box, but it was the big competition with Redbox. And so there was a similar story there where Redbox had approached them. But Jim it was really an interesting case in seeing somebody that was running one of the largest, companies based on, a lot of revenue, but also almost 10,000 locations. And Jim, was almost, like a broken man, and he just hated being the person that was going to be known for putting Blockbuster in the grave. So, yeah, I think Jim's the one that had that meeting that you were just talking about and turned them down.
So I actually wrote my college thesis on Blockbuster and what caused them to go bankrupt, because a lot of people they go with the easy answer, Netflix and or Redbox, put them out of business. But I went and actually did all the math and proved out that their market share was pitiful at the time, and streaming really wasn't a thing back in 08, 09, 2010. So I dug into it a little more, and I eventually found the old controller. And I said, hey, in your opinion, what really took down Blockbuster? And he said, what we didn't see coming was the pivot from people wanting to borrow movies to people wanting to own movies. With VHS, we had that nice exclusivity window where for 90 days, a video cost $100 and nobody wanted to pay that. And all they could do is watch that movie, and plus it was VHS, so it wore out after 6 or 7 times. A DVD not only came with the whole movie, it came with hours of additional content, and it was only $19.99. And when people said, wow, that's something I want to own and I want to keep it forever versus I want to borrow it. And then they viewed Blockbuster as a place to borrow things and then get yelled at if you returned them late versus companies that they've more perceived as being purchase organizations. So according to Gary, the biggest thing that put them out of business was Best Buy. Best Buy, Target, Walmart, where people believed those were places you went to purchase something. So Blockbuster tried to do that pivot where, we're half rental, but we're half buy, but it was too late by that point.
Yeah, and I think it's just a great example of a company that just didn't pivot to the right place at the right time. And if all of you are old enough, you'll remember they actually made a huge run at the music business and tried to consolidate that industry. And you talk about the 2 things you don't want to be in today. It's video DVD rentals or music, music sales. So unless it's digital. So no, it's great. Thank you, Edward. And any other questions out there before we wrap this up? I think we're right on time. 9:44 here.
Wonderful. Hey, I want to say thank you, Dean, for coming in and presenting. This was a great start to the day. As Dean was talking about, our very next presenters in 15 minutes, we have the CEO of School of Rock talking about some of the things that they've done and the ways that they've pivoted over the last several months. So all of you have a 15-minute break, and thank you again to Dean. Thank you to all of you for attending today.